It's clear that Florida State has completely fallen off the map in terms of college football. There's a lot of reasons why. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Mike Norvell, he comes from Memphis in 2020 to start being the head coach at Florida State. In his first two seasons, very rocky. 8-13 in 2020 and 2021. And then in 2022, he brings in a plethora of transfers. A lot of guys you've heard of on this Florida State team. Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Renardo Green, Jarian Jones, Johnny Wilson, Jordan Travis, and Trey Benson. All of those guys were either juniors or seniors with red shirts and injuries and whatnot mixed into it. But in 2023, they were all senior leaders for this team. And then they also brought in Michigan State wide receiver Keon Coleman. This set up a perfect storm combined with the fact that Clemson had fallen off and Sam Hartman had left Wake Forest, leaving Florida State basically as the one team that could stand the test of an entire season and win the ACC. And that's exactly what they did. They went 13-0. Jordan Travis has a gruesome leg injury versus North Alabama near the end of the season, and they just did not look the same after that. They played Florida and Louisville after that. Like I said, did not look the same, and they were snubbed from the college football playoff. The playoff committee did make the right decision by not including them in the playoffs, but it is a snub nonetheless. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the glimpse that we got to see of the new Florida State in the bowl game versus Georgia. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's not fair to compare them in the end of their season when all of their seniors opted out. But let's face it, that is exactly what we've seen of Florida State in the first two games. And it's because without these 8 significant players, Florida State was not able to do like an Alabama or a Georgia reload. They brought in a ton of transfers. Let's go ahead and talk about a few of them. Malik Benson, wide receiver from Alabama. Jalen Brown, wide receiver from LSU. Roydell Williams, a running back from Alabama. Marvin Jones, an edge rusher from Georgia. All of these guys rated as like 4-star type transfers. If you look at the portal, FSU ranked one of the best in the country. But when you look at the guys who transferred, it's a bunch of players who never got to start at their universities. Like Malik Benson and Jalen Brown, they didn't play that much at wide receiver. Roydell Williams, he got a lot of reps, but he was never the starter / bell cow type back. So when you get to the start of this season for Florida State, you have 2 massive losses against Georgia Tech and Boston College, both teams that bring back a lot of continuity from last year. Florida State, obviously, it's clear that they're not going to be the team that they were. The question now is, how do they handle that going forward? DJU, their starting quarterback from Oregon State, is one of the only really experienced players on this roster. The offensive line does not look like it did last year. The defensive line is obviously missing their senior leadership. They have allowed 226 yards on the ground on average in their first 2 games. And then to go back to that offensive line, they have had 47 rushing attempts for 119 yards. That's less than 3 yards a carry. It is absolutely atrocious. But the overall picture that I want to talk about here is that Mike Norvell may not be the coach that we thought that he was because of last season. In his 5 now years at Florida State, they are 4-8 versus top 25 teams, and they only have 2 winning seasons. Now, obviously, there's a lot of question marks going forward for this year, but if you look at the games that Florida State has got to continue to play, they've got to play Memphis, who is not, it was a sleeper team. They are expected to be contending for that 12th group of 5 college football playoff spot. I definitely think that that game could be closer or an upset if you asked me. They also have to go on the road at SMU, at Miami, at Notre Dame. Very tough games. At best, I think Florida State could finish 8-4, but realistically, it's looking more like a 6-6, 7-5 type season. Now, all that being said, you bring in these transfers every single year. You try to get recruits to buy in, but does anybody buy in to a 6-6 or 7-5 Florida State team who, again, is going to have to make a ton of movement in the offseason to be relevant next year? There are a lot of seniors on this team that do not have eligibility for the next season, and that is the big factor here for Florida State. In my opinion, I doubt that they can make the reload for next year and be an ACC contender, but it's possible. I do think, though, that they have to go at least 6-6, or else maybe Mike Norvell might not be with Florida State next year. I mean, we saw LSU win a national championship in 2019, and then by the end of 2020 into 2021, Ed Ogeron was out the door, which is mind-blowing to me. But all that being said, that's a similar situation here. LSU in 2019 catches lightning in a bottle with the transfer Joe Burrow, senior leader, and then he leaves. They fall off the map with the rest of their team, and they have to reload and hire a new coach. And now they're sitting back as a top 25, I guess, potential playoff contender this year. That's to be determined, but regardless, they did make a coaching change, and I kind of expect Florida State to do the same if they want to get back to the pinnacle of college football. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.